Hi guys, welcome to a new series of videos which are basically an accompaniment to the ebooks available from our website. Today's video is all about triggers. What we mean by triggers is any situation, person, thought that triggers that anxiety response. So let's get on into it. Anxiety is something we all experience, and I've talked about triggers before because obviously without a trigger you wouldn't really have anxiety. In an ideal world, triggers basically would be something where there is a threat to your life. I say ideal world because what's happening nowadays is we are developing triggers based on social standards. We're getting anxious when we don't get enough likes on a post. We're getting anxious when we feel we're being judged for what we wear, or if we're not keeping up with latest fashion standards, or if we don't have enough money in the bank to flex to our friends. Whatever it is, it's not how it's supposed to be when it comes to the anxiety response. This video is designed to help you figure out what your triggers are, right? Because we all understand the concept of triggers, but it can be difficult to get in tune with ourselves and understand actually what is causing us to feel anxious. I'd like you to start with listing out the situations in the last 2 weeks where you felt anxious, right? So write down where you went, who you were with, what thoughts were running through your mind if you can remember, but list as many as you can. When I'm talking about feeling anxious, I mean high levels of anxiety. So for the purpose of this course, we will use a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst anxiety or panic attack you've ever experienced, 1 being you don't even notice it. Right, so anything really above a 4 or a 5 is what you want to be focusing on in terms of situations. Anything lower than that is most likely going to mean that it's a thought about a situation, and then it can be a little bit harder to identify triggers. So when you go away and do that, the next step is to actually look for any common themes. When you have your list, you might start to notice that you're only really feeling anxious if you're in a quiet place. You might notice that you're only feeling anxious on the way to a busy place or in a busy place. So take, for example, you've got 3 situations where it's actually you're out with a group of friends. One place might be the cinema, one place might be in the park, one place might be a shopping centre. What you might notice is that actually it's not really anything to do with being indoors because you were anxious in the park. It's not really anything to do with silence because you're in busy places. But what you might notice is actually it was on a busy day and I felt really trapped because of how many people were there. It might also be that someone in that group that you're hanging around with is triggering the anxiety. Those are the sort of themes you want to look for. Step 3, once you've got your sort of hypothesis of what's triggering your anxiety, it's time to go test it. So pick a couple of the situations that are pretty easy to replicate. Obviously, if one of your situations is an exam, that's going to be a little bit harder to replicate until you just have another exam. So look for the ones that are something within your control. Go and test out 3 of them, and once you've tested them, write down basically who you're with, where you were, and how you felt this time. That'll then allow you to figure out, is that actually triggering your anxiety, or was it something else that was happening in that situation, or was it a thought about a different situation? Because one of the things is when you're dealing with high levels of anxiety, you can feel anxious if it just crosses your mind, the thought of a different situation. So you might be out in the park with your friends and feel super anxious because tomorrow you've got your driving test, right? So it's important to narrow it down to figure out what is actually triggering that anxiety. If you're feeling a little bit confused when you're looking at the situations that are making you feel anxious and you're like, actually, it's every situation. It's when I'm alone, it's when I'm with people, it's when I'm inside, it's when I'm outside, it's when I'm busy, it's when I'm bored, it's just all the time. Those are the situations where you will really actually have to just keep trying out those situations bit by bit and altering factors. So the moment you feel anxious, write down where, when you are, and what you're thinking about. Because if you are anxious all the time, it is most likely to do with a specific thought that you're having. And by writing down what you're thinking every single time you're anxious, you will notice a pattern. In an ideal world, we would all be able to go counselling, would be able to speak to somebody one-to-one, but we don't actually all have that resource. And this is why I've created this video, to hopefully try and help you sit down with yourself as if you were sitting down with a therapist and understand what is triggering your anxiety. A trigger doesn't mean a cause. To be clear, there are so many different causes of anxiety, and getting to that is a whole lot more complicated than understanding your triggers. For me, actually, it took a while to understand what my triggers were. Here's a little story time. I first started to feel anxious in an exam, and I'd never felt anxious in an exam before, so I didn't really understand what was going on. Then I started to feel anxious in a specific lesson. So I assumed, you know what, it's just that lesson. It's just, for whatever reason, that subject is triggering my anxiety. But then it started to spread. It started to affect my other lessons, and you think, maybe it's the people, right? It's a small school. Maybe it's just the people I'm around. In actuality, it was more likely that I'd just reached burnout as such. I'd reached a point where I'd lost control in so many aspects of my life that this was my subconscious's way of rebelling, which meant it was really hard to find what the trigger was. But at the time, it doesn't matter what the cause is. You have to figure out how you're going to cope and what you can do and what you can't do. So for me, I knew that an exam would trigger my anxiety. Whatever the reason behind that doesn't matter, but an exam would cause my anxiety to skyrocket. Because of that, I could then get help with the school so that I could do my exams in a different way. Similarly, I noticed that silence was a problem, right? Sort of ties in with exams. I hate being in a place that is quiet. So what that means is, when I want to go meet up with friends, I make sure I'm in a busy place. It's by understanding your triggers you can adapt and actually not end up just completely isolated. Hopefully you found this video somewhat helpful in identifying your triggers. Don't forget you can download the ebook from the Zortex website, which has a little bit more information and a few activities in there. And I'll see you next time.